Welcome back to Running Strong. My name is Will Frantz. If you enjoy this podcast, I'd really appreciate you hitting subscribe. If you've already done that, both thank you and please consider sharing it with someone else because it really would help it get out to a wider group of people. Last week, I said I was going to discuss Achilles tendon stuff, and by stuff, I mean injuries and injury-adjacent things, and problems and pains, and things that might be associated with rehab, but I'm not going to actually call them rehab, both openly for legal reasons, and because rehab often gets a bad name where we think of really slow, light exercises that don't actually create a lot of long-term change. Now, in the time I released this, I got an email from someone, someone from whom I learn a lot of Achilles and just tendon stuff in general. And he has put out a new course, which I'm going to be taking. So I will probably have more information on this soon, but I said I was going to do a thing, and I'm trying to do better about following through on the podcast and emails and all these things that I try to put out with free information. So we're going to record it with what I have now and what I've been doing lately, and then I'll update it if needed. The man's name for the record is Peter Malieris, and he runs a website called tendinopathy.rehab.com, and he is a researcher and whatever physiotherapist. He's in Australia. I think it's a physiotherapist down there. It's not exactly a PT. Well, it is a PT, just by a different name. So for today, let's discuss some stuff about Achilles. And one of the reasons I care about the Achilles is because mine is not great, right? So this is the thing that has pushed me to learning more about it so that I can continue to run and do the stuff that I like to do. A lot of this stuff will have crossover with other tendons. Some techniques apply to some tendons, but not to all tendons. Some tendons are just actually different. We have like energy storage and positional tendons, and these do respond a little differently. They have different structures when we get down to like minutia of details, all this stuff. So treatments might be a little different for certain things. Just to say, if we're talking about your Achilles, some of the rehab-y adjacent exercises might not apply to your patellar tendon, or at least like the theory behind them might not be quite the same. The overall theory should be, but the specific theory maybe not so much. And even more so if we're going to look at something like an Achilles tendon and you're like anterior tibialis, the muscle in the front of your shin, that tendon, those might be significantly different because one of them is an energy storage tendon and the other one is more of a positional tendon. That said, a lot of the basics going to be the same, but some of the details might be really different. Now, I'm not a medical professional. If you're dealing with an injury, go see a medical professional, maybe. I spend a lot of time with people bridging the gap between what we might call PT and training, but most people I coach who've been through an injury come to me post-PT or post-doctor. So even though I've done quite a bit of this, I'm not usually like the first point of access for people. And just in general, getting medical advice from a podcast isn't a great idea. I realize that our medical system is absolutely fucked, but that doesn't mean the answer is to, pursue all of your answers from unqualified idiots on the internet, right? So I get it. I've had my struggles with the medical industry that I'm not going to get into here, but maybe go see a physical therapist, at least to get a diagnosis and see what might be going on. Second, when it comes to tendon stuff, a lot of tendon injuries come as a result of the muscle not doing its job well enough, right? So when it comes to your Achilles, it might be injured because it's almost certainly injured because it was taking too much load. All injuries are a result of stress, some kind of stress, being applied to a tissue past the point of tissue tolerance, right? Whether that's a stab wound or an Achilles rupture, all of these are a stress being applied to a tissue past the point of tissue tolerance. And there are multiple factors here when it comes to tendons. The tendons might have been incredibly weak, and we can train our tendons, but some of it is just understanding that most of your tendon development, we're talking like 50, 60, 70, like a good amount of your tendon development for your life is going to happen below the age of 17. So if we look at someone who's like a runner in a running group and they never seem to have like an injured Achilles, and they were a like high school running phenom, that might be why, right? They were put, some of it, not all of it, but some of their injury prevention is just the fact that they were running 100 miles per week during the time where their body was most capable of developing tendons. And as a result, it developed thick and effective tendons, so their tendons are pretty fucking strong. And as a result, they are not going to have as much propensity towards injury as people who didn't do any of that when they were a kid, right? And that's going to be me. I played sports, but I wasn't a distance runner by any stretch of the imagination. And as a result, I didn't get some of this Achilles tendon development that I would have if I had done more of that, right? So we have to understand our history, and the history, like not just of the past year or 2 years or whenever the injury started to show up. We have to understand our history as a like lifetime framing of athletics. So this isn't really going to be helpful when it comes to treating your current Achilles tendon problems, but it could be a reason to kick your kid out the door and have them do physical activity. But that's not what this is about. We also get a decent amount of tendon development from like habitual use, right? And this is going to be your daily or weekly runs. So if you want to have a strong Achilles tendon, then we want to stimulate the Achilles regularly. This could be running, this could be jumping, this could be like playing sports of some variety, right? But having this regular habitual Achilles tendon development, or rather stimulation, is going to increase the development. And this is a thing that can happen as we go throughout life, right? Like not just when we're younger than 17. And then finally, we get some level of stimulus from lifting, which is largely what we're going to address here, because this is one of the biggest things we can control. This is one of our biggest levers that we can pull and adjust during a time of injury stuff, right? Now, if you're doing the whole habitual use thing, like that second tier that we were talking about, you might overuse it. You might habitually use it too much. And this is how we're going to end up with an injury, right? This happens a lot. And we need to figure out how to recover from that. And then when we look at things like lifting, when we think of lifting, we might think of like heavier weights or bigger movements or slower movements or whatever we might think of. But everything from a like band work at a PT's office to heavy calf raises on a like leg press are going to be the somewhere on this spectrum of weight training or resistance training. So when we talk about rehabilitative or corrective exercises, those are often just exercises where the load is really low and we're trying to be very intentional about which muscles we're trying to stimulate. And this is just to say that pretty much all exercises can be used for rehabilitation depending on you and your needs and which tissues are a problem. And this is one thing that we see when we look at rehab for like really strong, really good athletes. If you have a linebacker who grabs 300-pound men and throws them for a paycheck, then that person probably shouldn't be. I have seen them be on it too long. We probably shouldn't be doing rehab with like the red mini band, right? Like that isn't probably a good fit for them. They probably need to be doing something else that will be a better more appropriate stimulus for this person's ability to jump 3 feet in the air and heave 300-pound men to the side. We have to have a training stimulus that actually does something, right? Now, if we were looking at injury recovery, a lot of this is just going to be like, again, it's just going to be managing load or stress. So in the beginning, we probably want to try to train the muscle while we're letting the tendon recover. Some of the initial insult to connective tissue, whether it be tendons or fascia or whatever, is just going to come from inflammation. And it sucks, right? We just need to let that calm down. You need to let the tissue calm the fuck down. And that will be helpful in order to decreasing the pain. We don't want to completely stop stimulating the muscle in this process. Hell, we don't want to completely stop stimulating the tendon, probably, depending on what it is. Now, this is where we might see a difference for something like a patellar tendon to an Achilles tendon. If you have an Achilles tendon problem, you're probably going to be able to keep running. We're just going to have to moderate load. Probably is a very key word in that sentence. Anyway, moderate load, moderate intensity, figure out what we're able to do, and then move on from there. Whereas like patellar tendon injuries, jumper's knee, can absolutely end a season for some jumping sports like basketball. So we just have to be able to moderate and figure out what we're able to do and what's going to be wise for us to do. Now, once we figured out what's going on, we can, again, stimulate the muscle a little bit while trying to let the inflammation drop. Now, a good way to do this is going to be some version of like an isometric. Like if we look at an Achilles or even some like eccentric stuff, one of the standard exercises for an Achilles tendon problem is an eccentric calf lower or an eccentric calf raise. They're the same thing. And oftentimes this is going to be done as you press up into a calf raise with both feet, and then you pick up one foot and then lower over the course of like 3 to 5 seconds. Now, if we do this, we just understand that we're creating a muscle stimulus, and the reason we go up with 2 and down with 1 is because the tendon is just going to be slowly lengthening and working as a stability function on the way down, so it's not going to be creating as much force. The muscle is still going to get a lot of stimulus because we're going in this eccentric lower, and we're going in an eccentric lower that was twice as heavy as the thing that we lifted, so we're going to be able to get some level of muscle stimulus without putting too much stress on the tendon. And this may be really appropriate for a little while. Another thing that can be really good is an isometric calf raise at the top, right? So you press up into this like massive plantar flexion where your toes are down and your ankle is like flattish. I don't know how to describe it. Plantar flexion means your toes are pointed down. And we press all the way to the top of a calf raise and just hold. And we hold that squeeze for 20 to 40 seconds. I don't know. It depends on what you need. But we're going to maintain that. And that would be a good way to get started, right? And this would be a good way to like put some strain, probably not a substantial amount of strain, probably not a significant amount of strain on the muscle of the calf, but we'll put a little bit. It will help it not detrain. It will give it some level of stimulus, and it will also help squeeze some of the extra fluid out of the tendon, right? Some of the inflammation, some of the pain that we get when we have tendon problems is just from too much fluid being in between the collagen fibers of the tendon. So by doing this isometric calf raise, and holding for 20 to 30 seconds, we're just kind of like wringing it out like we're wringing out a sponge. And by doing that, we can give the tendon a little more ability to move in the way it's supposed to move. And so this could also be a good thing to do if you're about to go running and we're having some Achilles stuff and we figured out a way to like moderate the load of our runs. This could be a part of a prep exercise this is one of the reasons like toe walks and heel walks are helpful, because they start to prep those tissues. Now, if we're continuing to go through our rehab, let me back up a second. So when we're looking at rehab stuff, we can understand like what is going to put a lot of stress on the tendon, what's going to put a lot of stress on the muscle, right? So isometrics at the top are going to be probably some level of muscle stimulus, but not a ton of tendon stimulus. We can do some isometrics at the bottom. These are actually really good. They're annoying to set up. You can go to my YouTube channel and look up like 90-degree isometric calf something. Basically, you stand under something. I like to do this on a squat rack. I'll put a squat bar on my back and set it so it's just at my shoulder height underneath the J cups, or you can put like 1,000 pounds on the bar, not literally, but an amount you can't move with your calves. And then you're just going to drive up as hard as you can into the bar. So you're not really going to move, but you're going to be able to squeeze your calf as hard as possible, pushing up into that bar. We also have, once we start to get past that, we can have light calf raises. So we might just use body weight. We might use body weight with both feet, single foot, whatever we need. We could do them on a leg press machine. We could do them on a hack squat machine, but this will help get our calf moving again. Similar in here, a seated calf raise is really good. We have multiple muscles of the calf. There's a couple that we really care about. One is your gastroc. It's the thing with two heads on the back of it that we see really well. Then your soleus is below that, and they both attach into your Achilles. And the soleus tends to not be, let's say, as problematic when it comes to recovery. It's a little more controlled. You're not putting quite as much, it doesn't get as pissed. So if we do a seated calf raise, you're pushing more through the soleus so we can get some tendon stimulus without making the gastroc quite as angry. And then ultimately we want to move in from a rehab perspective into heavy calf raises. The tendon is going to get the most stimulus from a full range of motion, slow, and by slow I just mean like 2 seconds down and 2 seconds up. So controlled as we would with any other lifting movement, calf raise. And we can do that straight legged, we can do that bent. Again, we need to figure out kind of what is an appropriate stimulus and what response you tend to get. And then we do these training every 2 to 3 days, right? And if we used to do some of these rehab things like every day, but more recent evidence seems to indicate that we get better development with like 48 to 72 hours rest in between, which also tends to be true for muscles. And the nice thing is heavy calf raises are also the best way to train your calf muscle, right? Not just your Achilles. So ultimately, the best thing for the muscle is going to be the best thing for the Achilles. Now, understanding something as we go through this is we need to adjust for like the overall weekly volume and intensity on the muscle and tendon structure. So we're not just looking at like this 2 or 3 days of calf training that we'd be doing in the gym. We want to look at everything we're doing, right? So let's say you're at a stage where you're doing heavy calf raises. Like we've built up to actually being able to do heavy calf raises, and you're currently running about 30 miles per week on flat ground. And you decide to go do 10 of those miles this coming week on a like 5 to 10% incline, and you really push it. So we probably need to dial back the intensity on the gym calf raises this week, because that's going to be another big stimulus on the calf, that uphill engagement. For some people, depending where we are in a rehab, even switching from like a Bulgarian split squat to a rear lunge might be too much on the calf, and we have to take that into account. If we're in a Bulgarian split squat, your back leg is up on something stable like a bench, and we're just driving through that front leg. It's basically a single leg squat with a kickstand. Whereas a rear lunge, it's a great movement. One, it's going to be a little lighter, but two, that step back and then push off coming back forward is going to stimulate the calf quite a bit, because the calf and the Achilles have to catch your weight and then push it back to standing in the front. And if we have some level of Achilles injury, that might be too much. We can also understand that if we want to train the Achilles without putting as much stress on the calf or whatever, we could switch to a rear lunge intentionally, right? Like this can be another way to moderate load, to moderate volume, to figure out what we're trying to do. But we have to understand that all of these things play a role when it comes to training. And then finally, if we do something like plyometrics, which we're talking about the like old 80s version of plyometrics from Russia. I've done a whole thing on this. Look 50, 60 episodes ago. I don't know, as part of a strength training thing, but very reactive, right? And reactive, quick, snappy movements are some of the biggest stress for the tendons. It is a principle called jerk. And think about snapping a towel, right? So if we have something like a plyometric where you're hitting the ground and then very quickly coming back off the ground, it's this very snappy movement on the tendon where it's shortening and lengthening and shortening and lengthening very quickly. And there's going to be a lot of jerk as a result of this. I see this in tennis. Like, you'll get tennis elbows. Since I work at a tennis club, I talk to people with tennis elbow quite a bit. And one of the biggest things that's going to cause that problem isn't just hitting the ball. It's partially the rebound on the strings, because that bounce is a bit of jerk. But even more than that is the serve, because they come up and then snap their arm down really hard, and it gives this big push to that tendon right on the elbow. And that's one of the biggest contributors to tennis elbow, is that jerk from the serve, right? So it's not just the overall lifting on your Achilles, it's not just the running, it's also the variety of movement that we're doing and trying to figure out how to take that load, right? So in summary, all injury recovery is just trying to figure out how to stimulate the tissues we want to stimulate and then let other stuff recover. When we're first looking at an injury, honestly, if you have pain in a connective tissue area, be it your plantar fascia or like the bottom of your foot or your Achilles, if you catch it immediately and you can take 2 to 3 days off and just let the inflammation calm the fuck down, then you might circumvent this entire issue and just be able to start again in like 2 to 3 days and be fine. Now, if we've let it get out of control, and by that I mean pushing through it for like a week or two, right? It doesn't take a lot for an injury to technically become chronic. And if we've done that and we've been having this pain for like a week or more, we might need to take a second and let the recovery happen. And there we're going to try to stimulate the muscle while letting the tendon recover. And this is a tricky balance. It can go on for a long time. If you have Achilles pain, it's not like a death sentence to your running, but it does mean you might be dealing with it for months until we really figure it out and figure out what the stimulus ratio needs to be and how you need to go through it. And then one final note I'll have is it depends on the location of the Achilles. If it's in the middle, then when we're doing this calf work, we want to probably try to get as much full range as possible. Whereas if it's on the bottom of your heel, your Achilles tendon, we'd call it insertional tendinopathy. It's this pain right at the back, but underneath your heel. That's where your Achilles inserts onto your bone, onto your calcaneus. And if we're getting pain there underneath the heel, we probably want to stop our calf work at the floor, right? We don't want to actually get into that full dorsiflexion, that full stretch. I know I said that's really important, but when we have tendon problems, one of the things that makes certain tendon problems, like gluteal tendon problems or hamstring tendon problems, really difficult is compression, right? And when it comes to the Achilles, if we just wear like a shoe with a slight heel, like even like a 4 or 5 millimeter drop, and then don't continually drop it below, we're not going to get a lot of compression, because most of us just don't spend a lot of time in a scenario where we have big compressive forces of our Achilles overall calcaneus. But when we're doing calf raises or when we have an injury, we have to understand that we're trying to avoid that compression, so we want to limit the range of motion of our calf raises in order to do that. Anyway, I hope that was helpful. Again, I'm not a doctor. Go see a PT if you can. But if you're struggling with some Achilles stuff, this might give you some direction. And if that was as confusing as it might be, because I just said a lot of stuff with absolutely no visual aid about a bunch of training, then you're welcome to message me, and I'm happy to chat with you about it, and we can figure out if I might be a good fit for moving you in between that rehab to back to training space and like getting you back to running in the way that you want to be running.